Jack sat motionless in the defendant's chair, his hands clenched into tight fists beneath the table. The air in the courtroom felt heavy, suffocating, as if something unseen was pressing down on everyone present. The judge's gavel struck down hard, its sharp crack echoing off the wooden walls. Guilty. The word rang in Jack's ears like a death sentence. The murmurs in the room blurred into white noise, drowning in the weight of the unjust verdict. 15 years on the force. A spotless record. Countless criminals brought to justice. None of it mattered now. The evidence against him was damning. But Jack knew the truth. He had been framed. Someone had orchestrated this, planted the proof, and ensured his downfall. Yet, the worst part wasn't the prison sentence looming over him. It was the knowledge that he would be separated from Mike, his loyal K-9 partner, the only being in the world who had never once doubted him. From the back of the courtroom, Mike let out a low growl. His sharp golden eyes locked onto Jack. The German Shepherd had sensed something was wrong long before Jack had fully grasped the betrayal unfolding around him. Dogs always knew. The courtroom doors swung open as officers approached to take Jack into custody. But he couldn't move, not yet. He turned to the judge, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. "Your Honor," he pleaded, "before I'm taken away, I have one last request. Let me say goodbye to Mike." A hush fell over the room. Even the murmuring journalists and skeptical spectators fell silent. The judge hesitated, studying Jack with an unreadable expression. Then, with a slow nod, he granted permission. 3 minutes. The moment the restraints on Mike were loosened, the dog sprinted across the floor, his claws clicking loudly. Jack dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around his partner. "I'm so sorry, buddy," he whispered, tears stinging his eyes. "I let you down." But then, Mike tensed. His ears flicked. His nose worked frantically against Jack's jacket. And then he started pulling, hard. Something was hidden there, and whatever it was about to change everything. Jack barely had time to process the weight of his sentence before he felt Mike's sharp tug on his jacket. The German Shepherd's body stiffened, his nose working frantically against the fabric as if something vital had been hidden there. Jack frowned. He had worn this jacket all morning, and nothing had seemed unusual. But Mike was insistent. His deep, sharp bark cut through the thick tension in the courtroom, drawing every gaze toward them. A murmur of confusion rippled through the spectators. The judge furrowed his brow, his gavel hovering above the bench. "What's the dog doing?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of unease. Mike's barking only grew more urgent. Then, with one final yank, something small and metallic tumbled from Jack's jacket, hitting the polished courtroom floor with a distinct clink. A stunned silence followed. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the object. A recording device. Gasps erupted throughout the room. Whispers spread like wildfire. Jack's pulse pounded in his ears. Where had that come from? How had it gotten into his jacket? His mind raced as the officers beside him hesitated, exchanging wary glances before one of them stepped forward and picked up the device. The judge straightened in his chair, his expression hardening. "Turn it on," he ordered. The officer hesitated only a moment before pressing the play button. A static-filled crackle filled the courtroom, followed by a low, distorted voice. Then, clear as day, came the words that sent an icy chill down Jack's spine. "Just plant the evidence. No one will question it. Carter's clean record makes him the perfect scapegoat. Get it done." The courtroom exploded into chaos. Journalists scrambled to jot down notes. Spectators murmured in shock. And at the center of it all, the prosecutor, who had so confidently argued Jack's guilt, suddenly looked pale as a ghost. He stepped forward, his voice unsteady. This is not admissible. It's irrelevant." The judge silenced him with a sharp rap of the gavel. "Sit down," he ordered, his tone cutting through the noise like a blade. The prosecutor froze mid-step. Jack's mind reeled. He knew that voice. It belonged to Nathan, his former captain, his mentor, the man he had once trusted with his life. Mike remained by Jack's side, his ears twitching as if he sensed the weight of the moment. Jack reached down, gripping his fur as if to anchor himself to reality. The truth was now out in the open. Someone had framed him, and the evidence had just revealed itself in the most unexpected way possible. The judge leaned forward, his expression dark. "This trial is not over," he declared. "Escort the defendant back to holding." Secure that device. We are reopening this case. As Jack was led away, he stole one last glance at Mike. The dog's golden eyes held an unshakable intensity. Jack exhaled slowly. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope sparked in his chest. Mike had always been more than just a partner, he was Jack's lifeline. And together, they were about to uncover something much bigger than either of them had ever imagined. Jack sat in the cold, dimly lit holding cell, his mind racing with the revelation that had just unfolded in the courtroom. The words from the recording echoed in his head. Just plant the evidence. Carter's the perfect scapegoat. It had been Nathan all along, the man he had once respected. The leader he had trusted. The betrayal cut deeper than any sentence the judge could have handed down. Beyond the steel bars, the precinct was alive with chaos. Jack could hear the hurried footsteps of officers scrambling to process the shocking new evidence. He wasn't free yet, but something had shifted. The truth had started to crack through the lies. But something still didn't add up. Why had Nathan gone to such lengths to frame him? What was he trying to bury? Jack clenched his fists. There was more to this than just one corrupt captain. Meanwhile, across the city, Emily paced inside the K-9 unit. Her mind unsettled. After what had happened in court, she had insisted on looking after Mike until things were sorted. She knew Jack's dog better than most. And tonight, something was off. Mike had been restless ever since they left the courthouse. His sharp, intelligent eyes darted to every shadow, his ears twitching at the faintest noise. He wasn't just on alert, he was searching. Emily knelt beside him, running a hand through his thick fur. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Mike suddenly stiffened, his nose twitching as he pressed against the locker beside them. His tail dropped low, a deep growl vibrating from his chest. Emily's pulse quickened. She reached for the key and unlocked the compartment, hesitating only a second before swinging the door open. Inside, beneath a pile of uniforms, lay a small unmarked envelope. Heart pounding, Emily pulled it out and carefully unfolded the contents. What she saw made her stomach drop. Photographs, grainy, but clear enough to recognize Nathan, standing with a group of men, one of whom was a known criminal. Behind the photos was something even worse, a document detailing a series of payments, linking Nathan to a string of unsolved cases, bribery, and evidence tampering. Emily exhaled sharply, gripping the papers as realization crashed over her. This wasn't just about Jack. Nathan had been covering up something much bigger. She turned to Mike, who sat attentively beside her. His sharp eyes locked onto hers. "You just found the smoking gun, buddy." Emily didn't waste another second. She grabbed her phone and called the judge's office. Jack wasn't just innocent. He was the key to exposing an entire web of corruption. And now, thanks to Mike, they had the proof to burn it all down. Emily gripped the folder tightly as she stepped into the judge's office, her heart hammering in her chest. This was it. The documents she held weren't just proof of Jack's innocence, they were a direct link to a deeper, more sinister conspiracy. The judge sat behind his desk, his expression grave as he scanned the photographs and transaction records. With each passing second, his frown deepened. "This isn't just about Nathan," he muttered, flipping through the pages. "These payments, these cover-ups, they point to something much bigger." Emily nodded. Jack was never just a scapegoat. He was a threat. Meanwhile, in his holding cell, Jack sat motionless, staring at the ceiling. His body was still confined, but his mind was moving fast. The pieces were coming together. Nathan hadn't just framed him out of spite. He had been ordered to. Someone higher up had seen Jack as a problem. Someone who got too close to the truth. The metallic clank of the cell door jolted him back to reality. A guard entered, his face unreadable. "Carter, you've got a visitor." Moments later, Jack was led into an interrogation room, where Emily sat waiting. In front of her was the folder. The moment their eyes met, he knew they had something big. Emily wasted no time. She slid the photos across the table. Nathan's been working with criminals for years. He's been orchestrating cover-ups, planting evidence, making cases disappear. Jack exhaled, his jaw tightening. "And my case? It was never about you, Jack." Emily's voice was quiet but firm. "It was about who you were getting too close to." Jack studied the documents carefully. The pattern was clear: bribes, erased files, ghost cases that had vanished without a trace. But one detail stood out. Every major cover-up, every missing piece, led back to a single set of initials, AR. His stomach twisted. Who was AR? Before Emily could answer, a sharp growl broke the tense silence. Mike, who had been lying quietly at Jack's feet, suddenly snapped to attention. His ears flicked, his body rigid, his nose twitched toward the vent near the ceiling. And a second later, he let out a deep, warning snarl. Jack's instincts kicked in. He turned just as the lights flickered. The air in the room changed, thickening with something unseen. Emily's breath hitched. Then, a soft click. The unmistakable sound of a lock turning from the outside. Jack shot up from his seat. They weren't alone, and whoever had just sealed that door wasn't here to talk. Jack's muscles tensed as the lock clicked shut. A chill ran down his spine. Not from fear, but from the certainty that whoever was outside that door had no intention of letting them leave alive. Emily's eyes darted toward him, and she gripped the folder tighter. They know. Mike let out another low, menacing growl. His golden eyes locked on the ventilation grate near the ceiling. Jack followed his gaze. Something was off. The air felt heavier, charged with an unexplainable tension. Then, from beyond the door, came the faintest sound, a shuffle. The unmistakable whisper of movement. Someone was out there, waiting. Jack exchanged a look with Emily, his mind racing through their options. They were trapped, but not unarmed. Emily slid a small pocket knife from her boot while Jack reached for the only thing at his disposal, a metal chair leg he had loosened during his time in holding. It wasn't much, but he wasn't going down without a fight. Then, the lights cut out. Darkness swallowed the room whole. Emily cursed under her breath, and Jack immediately moved, placing himself between her and the door. Mike let out a single, sharp bark, his body tense. Jack knew that bark well. It was a warning. A heartbeat later, the door handle twisted violently. Someone was trying to force their way in. Jack pressed a finger to his lips, signaling Emily to stay silent. Whoever was outside wasn't expecting a fight. He motioned to Mike, then to the door. The dog understood. The handle rattled again, harder this time. Then, bang, the door was shoved open, and a dark figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the faint emergency light from the hallway. Jack didn't hesitate. He lunged. His makeshift weapon connected with the intruder's ribs, forcing a grunt of pain. The man staggered, but before he could recover, Mike launched himself forward, his jaws clamping down on the attacker's arm. A strangled cry filled the room. The man thrashed, but Mike held firm, his powerful grip locking onto flesh and refusing to let go. Emily seized the moment. She darted past them, wrenching the door fully open. Jack landed a final blow to the attacker's knee, sending him crashing to the floor. They had seconds to move. Jack grabbed Mike's collar, yanking him back just as more footsteps thundered down the hall. Shadows moved toward them, voices barking orders. They had been hunted, but now the tables had turned. Jack looked at Emily, his eyes blazing. Run! And they did, with Mike leading the way. They vanished into the darkness, knowing this fight was far from over. Jack's pulse pounded as he sprinted down the dimly lit corridor. Emily close behind, and Mike weaving between them like a shadow. The air smelled of dust and metal, the old precinct walls closing in on them. Behind them, shouts erupted, orders barked, boots pounding against the floor. They were being chased, and their pursuers weren't the type to take prisoners. Emily clutched the folder of damning evidence to her chest. "We need an exit, now," she hissed. Jack's eyes darted ahead. The emergency lights flickered, casting eerie, shifting shadows. At the far end of the hall, a red exit sign glowed like a beacon. But Jack knew better than to trust an obvious escape route. They were being herded. Whoever was behind this had planned for them to run. And that meant the exits were either blocked, or worse, booby-trapped. "Not that way," Jack muttered, yanking Emily's arm and pulling her down a side corridor just as bullets ripped through the air behind them. Sparks flew as metal and concrete shattered from the impact. Too close. Mike growled, his ears pinned back. He darted ahead, sniffing furiously before suddenly veering left, toward what looked like an abandoned supply closet. Jack didn't hesitate. "Trust him," he ordered. Emily hesitated only a second before following them inside. Jack slammed the door shut behind them, locking it just as their pursuers skidded to a stop outside. Shadows passed under the doorframe. "Where did they go?" a voice demanded. "Search the hall," They couldn't have disappeared. Silence fell, the kind laced with danger. Jack held his breath. Emily gripped her knife. Mike remained deathly still, his golden eyes locked on the door. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, retreating footsteps. The men were moving away. Jack let out a slow, careful breath. They had a few moments. Emily wiped sweat from her brow. Now what? Jack turned, scanning the closet. There had to be a way out. Mike sniffed along the back wall, then suddenly stopped. His tail flicked once, twice. Jack crouched down, running his fingers along the floorboards. Then he found it, a loose panel, one that, when lifted, revealed a narrow, crumbling passage leading to the underground maintenance tunnels. Jack met Emily's gaze. We go down. Emily didn't hesitate. She handed the folder to Jack and slid into the opening. Jack followed, then whistled for Mike, who slipped in right behind them. As they disappeared into the darkness below, Jack knew one thing. They were no longer just running. They were hunting, and this time, they were taking the fight straight to the source. The air in the underground tunnel was thick with dust and the lingering scent of damp concrete. Jack crouched low, leading the way through the narrow passage as Emily followed, gripping the folder tightly. Behind them, Mike moved like a silent specter, his nose twitching, ears rotating at every faint noise. The flickering light from Jack's phone barely cut through the darkness, but it was enough to reveal this place hadn't been used in years, at least. Not officially. Emily wiped a layer of grime off a rusted metal plaque on the wall. This tunnel connects to the old courthouse basement. She whispered. Why would there be a sealed-off passage leading there? Jack exhaled sharply. Because the courthouse isn't just for trials. He traced his fingers along the aged walls, feeling grooves, indentations where locks had once been placed, holding cells, secret transfers. Nathan's corruption didn't just stretch into the department, it ran deeper. Into places people had forgotten existed. Mike suddenly stiffened. His low growl echoed off the walls. Jack froze. Something was ahead. He reached for Emily's arm, signaling her to stop. Then, in the silence, they heard it, a slow, deliberate footstep. Not from behind them, from in front. Jack's grip tightened around the flashlight. He flicked the beam forward, and the light landed on a shadow just ahead. A figure stood there, just barely visible beyond the reach of the glow. Jack's breath slowed. Whoever they were, they had been waiting. Emily pulled out her knife, her knuckles white. Jack. The figure took a step forward, revealing the unmistakable outline of a man in a tailored suit, his face obscured by the darkness. Then, a familiar voice, smooth, calculated. You should have left well enough alone. Jack. Jack's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. A.R. The man who had orchestrated it all. Jack took a slow step forward, placing himself between A.R. and Emily. Mike stood rigid beside him, his teeth bared. Jack's jaw tightened. You framed me. You tried to bury the truth. And now you're here. What? To finish the job? A.R. let out a small chuckle, the sound unnervingly calm. No, Jack. I'm here to offer you a choice. Jack narrowed his eyes. He had heard those words before, always from men who thought they were untouchable. Emily shifted behind him. Ready? Mike let out a single, warning growl. Jack set his stance, his voice low and steady. I don't make deals with ghosts. And just like that, the tension in the tunnel shattered. A.R. moved, and Jack had less than a second to react. The instant A.R. moved, Jack reacted. His instincts, honed from years on the force, kicked in. He lunged forward, twisting his body just as a blade slashed through the air where he had stood seconds before. The metallic edge gleamed under the dim light, missing him by mere inches. Emily sprang into action, darting sideways to avoid a second figure emerging from the shadows, a heavily armed enforcer. A silent accomplice to R's schemes. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was an ambush. Jack barely had time to register the numbers against them before Mike exploded forward. A blur of fur and raw muscle. The German shepherd clamped his jaws onto R's wrist, forcing him to drop the weapon with a sharp cry of pain. The would-be puppeteer was finally losing control. Jack wasted no time. He grabbed A.R. by the collar and slammed him against the tunnel wall. Dust and debris rained down as the impact sent shockwaves through the confined space. You've spent your life pulling strings. Jack growled, his grip tightening. But this time, You're the one caught in the web. AR gasped, struggling against the pressure, but his smug smirk never fully faded. You really think you've won? His voice was hoarse, but there was something eerie about the way he spoke, as if the battle had already been decided in his favor. Emily ducked beneath a swing from the enforcer, slashing her knife across his forearm. Blood spattered the damp floor, but the man barely flinched. Whoever AR had brought with him wasn't just some hired muscle. These were men prepared to die for him. Jack had no intention of giving them the chance. Emily, now. She didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, she tossed the folder, the damning evidence, toward the tunnel's exit, where a faint glow of light signaled an open hatch above ground. Jack saw the flicker of panic in R's eyes. That was what he feared the most, not death, not defeat, but exposure. For the first time, the man who had operated from the shadows was about to be dragged into the light. AR thrashed violently, trying to break free, but Jack was stronger. Mike kept his powerful grip locked onto the man's arm, a silent reminder that no amount of power could protect him now. The enforcer, bleeding and realizing the tide had turned, took one final desperate look at his leader, then turned and ran. Jack pressed AR harder against the stone. Your empire just crumbled. The sounds of sirens echoed from above. Reinforcements had arrived. R's lips parted, as if to make one last plea. But this time, Jack wasn't listening. Justice had finally caught up to the man who thought he was untouchable. The wail of sirens filled the night as Jack emerged from the underground tunnel. Gripping R's wrists in ironclad cuffs, the once powerful puppet master, the man who had orchestrated Jack's downfall, was now nothing more than a captured fugitive. His expensive suit was torn, dust clinging to his once pristine image, a reflection of the empire he had just lost. Mike trotted beside Jack, his keen eyes still scanning their surroundings, ensuring there were no last-minute surprises. Emily followed, the folder of damning evidence clutched tightly against her chest. The moment they stepped into the open air, floodlights from squad cars illuminated them, casting long shadows against the cracked pavement. Officers swarmed the area, weapons drawn, ready for a fight, but it was already over. Captain Nathan, the man who had once stood at the top of the department with an air of invincibility, had already been taken into custody. His downfall had sent ripples through the ranks, exposing a web of corruption that stretched further than anyone had dared to imagine. The department was no longer theirs to control. The judge stepped forward, his eyes sweeping over the trio, Jack, Emily, and Mike. There was something almost reverent in his gaze. You did it, he said simply. Jack exhaled, his grip loosening slightly on R's wrists. Did he? The battle had been won, but the scars remained. He had spent weeks fighting for his name, clawing his way through the darkness of deception. But it had cost him more than he could count. We exposed the truth, Jack corrected, his voice rough from exhaustion. That doesn't mean the fight is over. Emily placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. No, she agreed, but it's a start. Nearby, AR was shoved into the back of a police vehicle, his once arrogant smirk wiped clean from his face. Jack watched as the doors slammed shut, locking away the man who had tried so hard to silence him. Mike let out a single, low bark, his tail wagging just slightly. Jack finally allowed himself to breathe, as the first light of dawn began to creep over the city skyline. He knew one thing for certain, he and Mike had earned this moment. For the first time in weeks, Jack was finally free. Days had passed since the storm of corruption had been exposed, but the echoes of battle still lingered. Jack stood on the porch of his home, staring out at the quiet street. For the first time in weeks, there were no threats, no shadows waiting in the dark. Mike sat beside him, his golden eyes steady, ears perked as if still expecting danger. Even in peace, he remained vigilant. Jack reached down, running a hand through the thick fur of his most loyal partner. We made it, buddy. The words felt foreign, like an ending he hadn't dared to hope for. Emily had moved forward, already working with the department's internal affairs team to clean up the mess that had been left behind. Jack, however, wasn't sure what came next. After fighting for so long, what did freedom even mean? Mike nudged his hand, as if sensing the weight of his thoughts. Then, without hesitation, he grabbed an old rubber ball from the porch and dropped it at Jack's feet. Jack chuckled softly. Maybe freedom meant starting over. As the morning sun bathed them in light, Jack threw the ball, and for the first time in a long time, he and Mike simply lived. Jack's journey wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about proving that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always rise. The fight against corruption had cost him, but it also showed him that justice is worth the battle, no matter the odds. Loyalty, like the unbreakable bond between him and Mike, is rare and invaluable. Powerful people may try to manipulate the system, but courage and perseverance will always expose them. In the end, Jack learned that freedom isn't just about being innocent, it's about fighting for what's right. Even when the whole world is against you.